A marketplace in the edge of Samaria. The scent of dried figs, children laughing in the dust, and the endless din of bargaining voices rising under the midday sun. Among the crowd, a man walks slowly. Not a merchant, not a buyer, not from this place. His robe is stained with the dust of the journey. His eyes searching unsettled, as if looking for something that hasn't happened yet. His name is Philip. He was not meant to be here. Just days before he had been preaching in Samaria, healing the sick, casting out demons, proclaiming the risen one. Crowds followed him. Joy swept through the city like wind through olive trees. But then a voice no one else could hear. Go south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. He had asked no questions. He had obeyed, but when he arrived there was no road. Only this market, only strangers, only noise. And yet Philip stayed, because something stirred within him. A whisper, a presence, a knowing without understanding. He did not know that a divine appointment was already unfolding. He did not know that across the market a royal chariot had just arrived. Inside that chariot sat a man, dignified, dark-skinned, robed in garments of a faraway land. An Ethiopian, a eunuch, a man of wealth and wisdom, yet with a hunger no gold could fill. He had come from Jerusalem, but had left still empty. He held in his hands a scroll, the book of Isaiah. His lips moved as he read. He was led like a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. But he did not understand. In his heart a question burned. Who was this man of sorrows, who had borne the wounds he could not explain? And in that moment, a stirring. Philip felt it. His eyes locked on the chariot. His heart raced. His feet moved. Not because he was certain, but because faith had taught him to run when the Spirit whispers. He drew closer. And as the noise of the market faded behind him, he heard it. A voice reading Isaiah, out loud, in public, in longing. Philip's steps slowed. The man in the chariot looked up, surprised but not afraid. And Philip asked the question that would change everything. Do you understand what you are reading? The Ethiopian laughed softly, bitterly. How can I? Unless someone explains it to me. In that brief exchange, two journeys collided. One from Samaria, one from Ethiopia, neither man knowing that heaven had orchestrated this moment before the foundations of the world. The stranger invited Philip into his chariot. And so, in the middle of a market surrounded by shouts and dust and trade, the good news of Jesus began to be preached again. Not to a crowd, not in a synagogue, but to one soul, one man, one heart ready to receive. And somewhere the heavens smiled. Because sometimes the greatest revivals begin with a single conversation. Have you ever been sent somewhere and had no idea why? Have you ever felt the tug of the Spirit to speak to a stranger, to walk away from the crowd, to trust without knowing the ending? Philip did. And so did the Ethiopian. They came from different worlds, different languages, different wounds. But both were waiting. Both were chosen. Both were caught up in a story larger than themselves. This is not just a Bible story. This is the fire that spreads quietly from soul to soul. The ember of truth carried by obedience into foreign lands. The invisible hand of God, orchestrating divine encounters in the most ordinary places. This is the beginning of a story you were never told. The story of a man who disappeared after one baptism, and a stranger whose conversion would shake an entire continent. The story of Philip and the Ethiopian. And you're about to see how one moment can echo for generations. So stay close. The journey begins in the marketplace, but where it ends will surprise you, like if you've ever obeyed without knowing why. Subscribe to follow each part of this unfolding story. Comment below. What would you do if God sent you to a stranger? Take a breath. Settle your soul. And let us begin where obedience first met mystery. He had left a city full of miracles to stand in the middle of noise. Samaria, had tasted heaven. There, in the shadow of Mount Gerizim, he had seen the lame walk, the possessed, delivered the hopeless, washed clean in the name of Jesus Christ. Philip had spoken, and entire households had turned from idols to light. Children followed him through alleyways, calling him Rabbi. Fathers brought their sons weeping. Mothers clutched their infants as if the words he spoke could be sewn into their skin. And now, he stood beneath the arch of a gate in the border town of Akrabim, feet listed, stomach empty, his hands trembling not from fear but from something stranger, obedience. The voice had come swiftly, without warning, a whisper that stirred not his ears but his spine. Rise, Philip. Go south toward the road that leads from Jerusalem to Gaza. He had not argued. He had not asked why, but he had imagined something different. He expected sand, silence. A long road winding past olive groves, perhaps a lone traveler under the sun. A stillness that would frame a divine appointment. But here, the road from Jerusalem to Gaza led straight through a bustling market town. It was noisy. It was chaotic. It smelled of sweat, citrus, and dung. Donkeys brayed. Children weaved between stalls. Spices clashed in the air, turmeric, myrrh, crushed cumin. The clang of bronze, the cawing of crows on a nearby roof, the bargaining of traders in 5 different tongues. This was not where prophets were supposed to stand. Philip adjusted the rough belt at his waist. He touched the hem of his tunic. He looked down at his feet, sandals cracked from the journey. No one here noticed him. No one cared. They passed by men with turbans and women with baskets, Greeks with leather pouches. A Roman officer speaking loudly to a merchant about taxes. He had been a preacher of crowds. Now he was a stranger among strangers. And still he did not move. He had learned long ago that obedience was not about understanding. It was about presence. It was about standing still when all logic said to leave. Because God did not need understanding. He needed vessels, and Philip had been emptied. The sun climbed higher. The dust glistened like ash in the light. Philip walked slowly through the outer rows of the market. Not quickly, not carelessly. He was listening, not to the world, but for the tremor beneath it, that small thread of divine music that hummed under human sound. It was faint, like a harp in a storm, and then a memory returned. A vision from the night before. Not a dream, but something deeper. He had been asleep, and yet he had seen a wide desert. A man in royal garb. A chariot stopped under a fig tree. And a voice full of grief reading a prophecy aloud into the emptiness. Philip had woken up crying. Now. In this place, in this crowd, he began to wonder. Was that vision for now? Is he here? He turned a corner into a quieter row. Here the stalls gave way to caravans. Tall camels stood spitting lazily. And there at the end of the lane was a gilded chariot, unmoving, elegant, its wooden wheels rimmed in bronze. A servant adjusted its side drapes, and inside, someone was reading. Not muttering, not whispering, but reading aloud. Philip froze. The words drifted across the lane. He was led like a sheep to the slaughter. And as a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Philip's chest tightened. He knew those verses. He had preached them. They were Isaiah's words, and they pointed unmistakably to the Christ who had died and risen. He moved closer. His sandals crunched against the pebbles. The guards near the chariot looked at him but said nothing. The reader was a man of deep skin and deep sorrow, a face worn not with age but with weight. He wore the robes of nobility, a eunuch of the Ethiopian court, perhaps. The seal of Candace shimmered faintly on the chariot's side, and the scroll in his hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from yearning. Philip stepped closer. The man looked up, and in that instant, something passed between them. Recognition without reason. Like the moment a net is drawn in, and the fisherman feels the weight of the catch before it breaks the surface. Philip opened his mouth. His voice was gentle but sure. Do you understand what you are reading? The man smiled, but it was a sad smile. He answered, "How can I, unless someone explains it to me?" And there it was. The moment, the reason for the voice, the reason for the road, the reason for the market, the noise, the vision, the dust. Philip's heart burned within him, not with pride, not with clarity, but with the quiet fire of purpose. He had been sent, and now he was here. The invitation came in a single glance, the kind of glance that says, "I have waited for you, though I didn't know your name." The Ethiopian shifted to the side, pulling the edge of his robe back to make room. The chariot was grand, but not impersonal. Curtains shaded its interior, and fine cushions lined the seat. The scent of pressed frankincense clung to the wood. A scroll rested open on the eunuch's lap, its Hebrew script elegant and clean, freshly copied. Philip stepped up. The moment his foot touched the step, a wind passed through him. Not a breeze, but something like a breath. Like the breath that hovered over the waters in the beginning. Like the wind in Ezekiel's valley that made dead bones stand. He sat. The chariot began to move. Neither man spoke at first. Outside, the noise of the market faded behind them like the ending of a storm. Only the creak of the wheel and the soft hoof falls of the oxen remained. Philip looked at the passage, Isaiah 53. The man had been reading the heart of Israel's sorrow and its hope. He was despised and rejected by men. A man of sorrows, familiar with suffering, like one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. The Ethiopian stared at the words. Then he turned. "Tell me," he asked, his voice low but earnest, "who is the prophet talking about, himself or someone else?" Philip met his eyes, and in that moment he did not see a foreigner, not a Gentile, not a court official, not a eunuch. He saw a soul cracking open, like soil, just before the rain. So he began. He did not raise his voice. He did not preach like in Samaria. He spoke like one watering a single tree in the desert. This man, the one Isaiah saw, he has come. The Ethiopian's eyes flickered. Philip continued. He walked among us, not with power, but with gentleness. He healed the blind, touched the leper, spoke to the forgotten. He was the Word made flesh, but they did not see him. They rejected him. They crucified him. The man's fingers tightened around the scroll. But Philip kept going. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. He paused. The chariot creaked on. The Ethiopian did not blink, so Philip whispered, but he did not stay dead. A silence fell between them. Not awkward, but sacred. The kind of silence that only exists after heaven brushes against earth. The eunuch breathed in slowly. "You're saying this is already done? This has already happened?" Philip nodded. It happened in Jerusalem, and it was finished with an empty tomb. The man looked down at the words again. He traced the edge of the scroll. He said nothing for several moments. But then, why have I never heard this? It was not an accusation. It was heartbreak. A man of rank, of wealth, of intelligence. And yet he had left Jerusalem, that holy city, with nothing but confusion in his heart. He had stood in the courts of the temple, but no one had told him. He had searched the scriptures, but no one had pointed to the Lamb. Now, in a moving chariot on a dusty trade route with a stranger from Samaria, he had found it. Truth, not theory, not legend. Living, bleeding, risen truth. He looked at Philip. His eyes were wet. "And this forgiveness, is it for someone like me?" He did not say more. He did not explain what he meant. But Philip understood. He understood the pain of the othered, the ache of being outside. A eunuch could not enter the inner courts. He could serve queens but not stand with priests. He was used but not embraced. But now, He heard of a Savior who touched lepers, who welcomed Samaritans, who healed the children of Roman soldiers, who looked at the thief on the cross and said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Philip's voice cracked with joy. "Yes, it is for you." The sun moved westward. The land outside grew quieter. Inside the chariot, the gospel was taking root. The eunuch asked questions. Philip answered with story after story. The birth in Bethlehem, the baptism in the Jordan, the weeping at Lazarus's tomb, the betrayal, the thorns, the silence, the cry, the empty grave. The Ethiopian listened like a man drinking after years in the desert. Something in him shifted. Not a flash, not a thunderclap, but a gentle breaking, the shell of years, cracking open to let the light in. He was no longer reading Isaiah. He was meeting the one Isaiah saw. The chariot slowed. They had left the market far behind. The road had grown quiet. Hills rolled gently around them, bathed in afternoon light. Philip finished recounting the moment when Jesus appeared to the disciples after the resurrection. The scars in his hands, the breath of peace he spoke, the commission he gave. The Ethiopian sat motionless, his fingers pressed together, eyes searching something far beyond the road ahead. A man who had spent his life in scrolls, now silent in the presence of living truth. Then he leaned forward, his voice trembling but resolute. "Look over there. Water." Philip followed his gaze. A small pool likely carved out by a spring that trickled through the rock. Clear, still, unexpected in such dry land. The eunuch turned to him. "What's to stop me from being baptized?" Philip looked into his eyes, and in that moment he saw not a foreign official, not a eunuch, but a child who had just found his father. He smiled. "If you believe with all your heart, you may." The man's reply came like thunder clothed in reverence. "I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God." The chariot came to a halt. The driver looked back startled, but obeyed. Two men stepped out, one in a prophet's robe, one in royal garb now dusty and damp from the road. They walked down the slope toward the water. The guard stood at a distance. The servant covered his mouth, watching with awe. The Ethiopian removed his cloak, stepped into the water. Philip followed him in. The spring was cool, alive, as if heaven itself had touched the earth for this very purpose. Philip placed a hand on the man's shoulder. The Ethiopian closed his eyes. The world held its breath. "I baptize you," Philip said, "in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." Down he went, buried into the water, like Christ into the tomb. Up he rose, gasping, alive. A sound escaped his mouth, something between laughter and tears. He wiped his face, looked to heaven, and wept openly. Philip looked upon him with joy, and in that moment a rush of wind, a brightness behind the eyes. And then nothing. He was gone. The Ethiopian blinked. He turned around, but the prophet was no longer there. Not on the shore, not by the trees. Just the spring, and the memory, and the joy. The man stood still, soaking wet, smiling like someone who had just been born. He returned to his chariot. The servant stared, but he only laughed. He stepped in, clutched the damp scroll of Isaiah, and leaned back, water dripping from his robes onto the fine fabric beneath him. He looked out the window as the chariot moved again. The road ahead was long, but his soul was light. No one knew what would come of that moment. No Roman census recorded it. No historian etched it into marble. But heaven knew, because from that single seed a flame would rise in the hills of Ethiopia. Churches would be planted, scriptures translated, songs sung in ancient tongues to a Savior once despised, now adored. And it all began with one man who obeyed, and one man who believed. Back on the road, the dust settled behind the chariot. The spring glistened in the sun. And somewhere far off, Philip walked again, carried by spirit, sent without map, ready for the next soul, the next voice in the crowd, the next stranger in need. And what about you? Have you ever looked at a stranger and known they were your assignment? Have you ever stood at the edge of a question and seen water glistening on the other side? Have you ever felt God tug at your feet to walk, to ask, to speak? Even when the world is noisy and full of doubt, Philip did. And so did the Ethiopian. And because they said yes, the story didn't end that day. It only began, like this video. If you believe small obediences shape eternity, subscribe to walk deeper into the sacred stories that shape the world. Share this moment with someone who's waiting for water. Comment. What would you say if someone asked you what is stopping me from being baptized? Take a breath. Settle your soul. And in part 2, discover what happens when a seed of faith falls into foreign soil and refuses to die. The journey south was not short. The wheels of the chariot creaked in rhythm as if humming a hymn only heaven recognized. Each turn of the axle carried the eunuch farther from Jerusalem, but not from God. He no longer gripped the scroll of Isaiah with confusion. He held it like a man who had just found his own name written between its lines. The water from his baptism had dried, but the fire within him had only just begun to burn. The servant who traveled beside him, a quiet man named Nebet, watched his master carefully. He had never seen the official like this, not in all the years of serving him. Not during political victories, not during royal ceremonies, not even after receiving honors from Queen Candace herself. But now, after a moment in a spring with a stranger who vanished like wind, there was light in his eyes, stillness in his breath, and a strange, unwavering joy. They traveled in silence for most of the day. But just before dusk, the eunuch turned to Nebet and said, "Have you ever heard of the man called Jesus?" The servant paused. The name was not unfamiliar. Rumors had reached even Nubian traders about a man crucified under Pontius Pilate. Some said he was a prophet, others more. But Nebet had never heard it from his master's lips. He responded softly, "Only in passing, my lord. They say he died." The eunuch smiled gently. "Yes, but he also rose." Nebet looked at him, searching his face. There was no jest, no parable, no madness, only certainty. And so, under the fading light of a desert sky, the man once marked by silence began to speak. He told Nebet everything. From the scroll in the chariot, to the stranger in the marketplace, to the water and the words and the spirit. Nebet listened, at first in respect, then in awe. Something stirred in him. He had followed his master into temples of stone, but never into something that felt alive. Not like this. By nightfall, the camp was made. Tents were pitched, fires were lit, guards posted. But the eunuch could not sleep. He sat outside facing the stars. The scroll of Isaiah open on his lap once more. But now he read with new eyes. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. The words no longer felt distant. They felt personal, not for them, for him. He thought of his past, the scars of his body, the ceremonies that made him safe for the palace but unclean in the eyes of many. He had given his whole life to duty, to royalty, to purpose, and still he had remained on the margins. Too high to be loved, too broken to be held. But now, he knew, there was one who had been cut off too, one who had no beauty that men should desire him, one who had been rejected so he could be welcomed. And in that revelation he finally rested. The gates of Meroe opened before him, carved from stone and bronze, marked with the symbols of royalty and fire. They stood like giants of silence, witnesses to generations of wealth, war, and wisdom. But on that day they received a new kind of treasure. The chariot rolled across familiar stone. Guards saluted, officials bowed. Musicians played soft melodies in the courtyard as evening lamps were lit. And yet, the man who stepped down was not the same man who had left. He had departed a royal servant. He returned a servant of the king. Inside the palace, everything gleamed. Gold leaf lined the walls. Silk banners swayed in the breeze. Scribes hurried through the halls, clutching scrolls and tablets. Priests of the old gods burned incense before altars shaped like lions. The court prepared to receive him with honors, but he asked for none. He walked through the splendor without hunger for it. He greeted the queen with reverence, but no longer with the weight of needing approval, because now his soul had already been accepted by someone greater. Nebat noticed first the way his master no longer looked for applause, the way he paused before speaking, the way he smiled not as a mask but as light. Others noticed too. His robes were the same, but something within him shimmered differently. At dinner, when an advisor praised a sun god's blessing, the eunuch lowered his gaze and whispered, "There is only one light now, and it shines from a hill far from here." Silence followed. Utensils paused. A priest nearby stiffened. The queen glanced over, curious, not yet concerned. But it had begun. In the days that followed, the change deepened. He no longer offered sacrifices at the court shrine. He no longer chanted with the temple priests. He rose early to read the scrolls. He called in Nebat and another servant named Asher, and he read to them from Isaiah, then from fragments he had gathered about Jesus. Nebat listened with quiet hunger. Asher laughed at first until the eunuch spoke of a savior who wept. "God does not weep," Asher had said. "This one did," replied the eunuch, "for a dead friend, for a broken city, for a world that would not receive him." Asher said nothing more, but he returned the next morning. Word spread, not loudly, not yet, but small rumors, that the queen's treasurer was praying alone, that he had spoken against the Sun Temple, that he had stopped eating meat sacrificed to idols. "He has seen something." "No," replied another. "He's lost something." But they didn't understand. He had found something, and now that something was changing everything. One night the eunuch sat alone in the outer garden. Stars shimmered over the Nile. Palm trees swayed. He read from Isaiah again, but his thoughts drifted. Would they ever believe? Would anyone here see what he saw? Or would the light in him always be foreign, strange, misunderstood? His heart ached. Was this baptism just for me, or am I to carry something greater? No voice answered. Only wind, only stars, only stillness. But within that silence, peace. Not the kind that removes struggle, but the kind that holds your heart steady in the middle of it. It began with whispers in the temple courts. A priest noticed the empty space where the eunuch once stood during morning offerings. Another reported that the queen's treasurer had refused the ceremonial oil. Then came the questions. Why does he no longer bow before the altar of the lion god? Why does he speak of a foreign man pierced silent and risen? Why has he burned his incense only to silence? Some said he had been cursed. Others said he was bewitched by Hebrew scrolls. Still others whispered what none dared say aloud. He follows the way. The queen called him in, not with anger, not with accusation, but with that ancient caution rulers use when faith threatens the rhythm of power. She asked of his travels, of his impressions of Jerusalem, of his encounters on the road. He answered with grace. He did not preach. He simply told the truth. A stranger, a scroll, a spring of water, and a name that had changed everything. Jesus. The queen listened. She nodded. She dismissed him with a half smile. But something had shifted. The court grew colder after that. Scribes avoided his eye. Priests muttered blessings with less sincerity. A member of the council warned him privately, "Your place here is not eternal unless you remember what built it." He bowed in reply. But he remembered something else. "My kingdom is not of this world." He could have retreated. He could have kept his faith quiet, safe. But the fire would not let him. One night, under a fig tree near the palace edge, he met with Nebat and Asher. They brought one more. A young scribe named Kifla Curious, skeptical, the eunuch shared again the prophecies, the stories of Jesus, the message of the cross. Kifle asked question after question. Why would God suffer? Why would he die? Why would he love someone like me? The eunuch didn't argue. He just told the truth again, told how love descended, how grace bled, how glory broke out of a tomb. Kifle was silent. Then he said, "Can we meet again tomorrow?" And so the first gathering began, not in a temple, not in a hall, but beneath a fig tree, on Ethiopian soil, lit by starlight. 3 men and 1 messenger. No pulpit, no choir, just a seed. Opposition did not sleep. One priest confronted him publicly. "You dishonor the gods who have blessed this nation." He replied softly, "I serve the one who made the Nile flow." Another scoffed, "You serve a dead man." The eunuch smiled, "No, I serve the one who conquered death." They could not silence him, not because he shouted, but because he lived differently. He loved the servants more tenderly. He forgave insults without bitterness. He walked with peace no gold could purchase. That spoke louder than sermons. Weeks passed. The group under the fig tree grew. A merchant's wife, an aging guard, a cook from the outer courtyard. They listened, they prayed, some even wept. And when the eunuch opened the scroll of Isaiah again, they saw not a prophet's lament, but a mirror, and a promise. He knew this was only the beginning. He might be cast out, he might lose favor, he might stand alone. But he remembered the man in the chariot, the water, the disappearance, the joy. And he whispered to himself, "What was planted in me must grow here, even if it costs everything." If this part moved something in you, take a moment. Reflect. In part 3, we'll follow the quiet fire spreading across hidden hearts and the cost of keeping light alive in darkness. They still met under the fig tree, but now there were too many to sit in its shade. They came early before sunrise. Merchants in plain robes, women with children on their hips, youths who carried baskets but stayed long enough to listen, servants who slipped away during incense hour, a soldier with old wounds who said nothing but never missed a meeting. No one shouted, no signs were posted, no songs were sung aloud. But something sacred stirred in the silence. A reading, a story, a name. Always the same name. Jesus. The eunuch watched them gather. He never called himself teacher. He did not preach from platforms, but his voice, once used only for reports and commands, now told parables by firelight, now shared mercy like oil poured gently into wounded souls. He read from Isaiah. He recounted the road to Emmaus. He described the nail marks, the empty tomb, the ascension into glory. He spoke with reverence, not rhetoric, and they drank every word. Kifle had become a quiet pillar. The skeptical scribe was now a seeker, copying fragments of teachings by torchlight, preserving words passed in whispers. Asher and Nebet led small circles in their quarters. Some nights the eunuch would find them praying behind storerooms, hands joined. What had begun as one baptism on a desert road was now a flame, hidden but real. The palace noticed. It was not the teachings that first concerned them. It was the pattern, a shift in loyalty, a quiet defiance of rituals, a joy that could not be taxed. An older priest confronted him in the garden. "You are confusing the people," he said. "No," the eunuch replied. "They were already confused. Now they are beginning to see." The priest's eyes narrowed. "Do not mistake patience for permission." And with that, he left. The eunuch did not sleep that night. He walked alone. The stone corridors of the palace felt colder than before. The moonlight stretched long shadows through the colonnades. The fountain's song echoed in emptiness. He remembered Philip, the way he vanished, not by death, not by rejection, but by divine purpose. Would the same fate meet him, or worse, would he remain? to watch the light flicker in men's hearts, only to see it crushed. He knelt beside the fountain. No scroll, no words, only breath. And a whisper within, "Do not fear the silence. Fire does not speak, but it burns." The summons came without warning. A scroll delivered by a palace aide sealed in royal red. It was an invitation, but every word felt like a command. By order of Her Majesty, Queen Candace. The treasurer is requested to preside over the upcoming festival of offerings in honor of the gods who have preserved the throne and harvest. The eunuch held the scroll in his lap. The words stared back like a test. He had once attended this festival without question, walked in solemn procession, carried incense, offered gold. But that was before the road, before the scroll, before the water. He showed the summons to Nebbit. The servant's hands trembled slightly as he read. "Will you go?" he asked, his voice low. The eunuch did not answer immediately. He looked out the lattice window. Children ran through the courtyard, laughing, unaware of divine tensions. He finally spoke. "If I go, I deny him. If I refuse, I defy the queen." Nebbit lowered his gaze. Silence sat between them. Then came a knock. Asher and Kifle entered. They had heard. Kifle broke the silence. "Perhaps you can attend, but not participate?" Asher frowned, but wouldn't even standing there say too much. The eunuch listened, but his mind was far off, standing again in that water. Hearing Philip's voice say, "If you believe with all your heart," that night they gathered under the fig tree. The group had grown nearly 24 souls. Eyes turned toward their teacher, not for commands, but for courage. He told them the truth about the scroll, the festival, the expectation. Someone gasped. A woman named Yared whispered, "If you stand there, they will believe you have bowed." Another, an older cook named Ezra, spoke firmly, "We will stand with you whatever comes." But the eunuch shook his head. "No, you must not suffer for my fire." Kifle leaned forward, "But your fire lit ours." He didn't sleep. The festival was 3 days away. Each hour felt like a weight pressing deeper into his ribs. He prayed, he read, he wept. And then, in the quiet of the third night, he remembered Jesus standing silent before Pilate, the lamb not defending, just being. He rose. He walked to the window. Stars blinked above Meroe. He whispered, "Let me not betray what you've started in me." Dawn came. The queen waited in the temple court. Officials lined the steps. Trumpets played. Drums beat. And when the time came for the treasurer's name to be called, he did not appear. The court murmured. The queen narrowed her eyes. A runner was sent. He returned breathless. He is not in his chambers. He is not in the palace. That evening, word spread like fire. He had resigned. No reason given. No letter read. Just silence and absence. But under the fig tree a voice rose, and the word burned brighter than ever. Pause for a moment. Let your heart rest in that silence. In Part 3's final chapter, witness what happens when a man loses the world and gains a kingdom. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was sharp, heavy, wordless condemnation wrapped in ceremony. The treasurer's seat in the royal court remained empty. At first they said he was ill, then disloyal, then irrelevant. His name was no longer mentioned in public gatherings. His records were quietly archived, his absence made official. But something strange happened. He did not vanish. He did not retreat into sorrow. He walked freely through the city, no longer bound to protocols, no longer watched by priests, no longer bowed by robes or titles. He was simply himself. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. The fig tree still stood. And now, so did a second gathering. Then a third. Soon they met in homes by rivers, near work posts. No signs, no trumpets, just faith. One day Kifle approached him with a scroll. Trembling hands, tears in his eyes. It was the first copied parchment containing all he had remembered of Philip's words. The eunuch held it like treasure. Not gold, not silver, but something weightier. He read the opening lines aloud to the small circle. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Asher whispered, "It is spreading." Yared nodded. "Even without temples?" Ezra smiled. "Perhaps this is the temple." They said no more. They just sat and let the truth burn silently between them. Years would pass. They would face hunger, drought, political shifts. But the fire never died. Each man and woman who heard carried it forward. From the river, cities to the mountains. From the queen's own maids to wandering shepherds. No armies, no crowns, just witnesses. And it all began with one man, one scroll. And a single question in a chariot. What is stopping me from being baptized? Before we walk into part 4, would you take a moment to bless this journey forward? Click like if this story stirred your heart. Subscribe to walk deeper with us into the flame. Share this with someone carrying silent faith. And may the God who called Philip and received the Ethiopian into his fold be your shield in quiet places. Until the next part, stay under his wings. The boy returned with the dust on his sandals and stars in his eyes. He had run for hours, not from danger, but from wonder. The fig tree had long since emptied. Even the river had quieted into night. But Kifla, the once scribe, now storyteller, burst into the courtyard, breathless. The eunuch looked up from his scroll. They listened. Kifla gasped. They didn't laugh. They didn't turn away. They asked me to come back. The eunuch smiled. Not with pride, with awe. The flame had jumped. It had begun with a single errand. A friend in a northern village, sick, afraid, disillusioned with the temple priests. Kifla offered to visit to bring herbs to pray. But what he brought was not medicine. It was memory. He told the story of the lamb. He recited words etched into him under the fig tree. He was pierced for our transgressions, by his wounds we are healed. And something happened. Eyes opened, hearts quieted. A fisherman asked for more. And now, 2 nights later, Kifla stood before his teacher, trembling with purpose. The eunuch listened. His hands rested on the worn scroll, the one they had copied together. He saw in Kifla what he had once felt in himself, a call, not of position, not of power, but of flame. And fire, once lit, must move. They sat under the fig tree one last time. The night was warm. Torches flickered low. Only a few remained: Asher, Nebet, Yared, Ezra. Kifla knelt, not to honor, but to remember. "I am afraid," he said. The eunuch nodded. So was I. On the road, in the chariot, even in the water. Kifla looked up. "Then why did you keep going?" The eunuch smiled gently. "Because he kept speaking, even in silence." They wrapped the scroll in cloth, placed it in a carved box of olive wood. Asher gave him a satchel. Nebet handed him dried figs and pressed dates. No ceremony, no parade, just prayer and tears. Before dawn, Kifla turned to go. He paused at the gate. "What if I forget the words?" he asked. The eunuch answered softly, "Then let them read your life." As the sky pinkened over Mera, a young man walked into the unknown. He had no title, no chariot, no prophecy, just a flame carried in silence. Far to the north, in lands where temples crumble and questions burn like drought, that same flame was already preparing a place to land. Far to the north, in lands where temples crumble and questions burn like drought, that same flame was already preparing a place to land. Kifla walked into the village alone. Dust clung to his sandals. The sun had long passed its peak. Only children and dogs met him at the edge of the olive groves. No one asked his name. No one welcomed him, but no one turned him away. He slept beneath a tamarisk tree. A shepherd gave him water. A baker's daughter handed him a crust of bread. He did not preach. He watched. He listened. And when night fell, he told a story. It was not a sermon. It was a memory. A chariot. A scroll. A question in the desert. Who is the prophet speaking about? He did not name Jesus yet. He let the names come slowly like seeds, not stones. The old widow who listened that night had buried 2 sons. The boy who sat nearby had not spoken since his father disappeared. The man who leaned against the wall once cast bones and whispered to spirits. None of them spoke, but none of them left. The second night, more came. Still no announcements, still no miracles. Just silence and stories. Kifle recited Isaiah from memory. He told of the Messiah, not as a warrior, but a wounded one. Not as a ruler, but a servant. Not as thunder, but as a whisper. And the old widow wept. On the third night, he mentioned the cross. He said nothing of blood. He said nothing of nails. Only this: he took our shame and he didn't give it back. The man who once cast bones stood up. He left. But the next night, he returned. With a question: what happened after Kifle breathed deeply? The fig tree teacher had prepared him for this moment. He answered, they buried him, but he walked out of death like a man stepping into dawn. The boy who hadn't spoken smiled. Later that night, as Kifle sat alone near the olive press, he whispered a prayer. Let this fire not burn out. Suddenly, a sound, soft, barely above the rustle of leaves. He turned. The boy stood there, tears on his cheeks. And for the first time in years, the child spoke. Tell me again about the man who weeps. The wind shifted. The oil lamps swayed. And the fire found new wood. When souls begin to burn again, even silence sings. And not far off in a city with stone towers and broken gods, the next spark was waiting to be born. The city of Adulis sat near the sea, ancient, cracked, once full of gods, now full of ghosts. Merchants passed through with ivory and incense. Soldiers drank in the squares. Priests lit fire in hollow temples. But hope, real hope, had long since sailed away. Into this city walked Kifle. No escort, no scrolls, only a box of olive wood and stories folded in his chest. He found a place near the water. A carpenter offered him lodging. Bold, suspicious, but not unkind. The man asked no questions, but watched closely. Kifle worked by day, chopping wood, fetching water. And at night he told stories. To no one at first. Then to the carpenter's grandson. Then to a girl with a twisted foot. Then to 2 sailors, too drunk to remember why they stayed. By the end of the week, they asked their first real question. How do we know you're not just another seller of gods? Kifle smiled. Because I have nothing to sell. The girl looked up. Then why are you here? He paused. Because someone gave everything and asked me not to keep it to myself. They asked for proof. He offered no signs, no wonders, only stories, only memory. Of a chariot, of a question, of a water-soaked robe, of a man who walked out of death with scars still shining. They didn't understand everything, but they listened. And listening, they softened. The carpenter never joined. But one day Kifle found fresh bread beside his bedroll, and a blanket newly mended. He said nothing, only smiled. That night, a storm hit the port. Boats crashed against the pier. Waves swallowed crates of myrrh and linen. Kifle ran with others to help. He pulled a sailor from the surf, held a lantern for the weeping woman searching for her brother, wrapped the girl's twisted foot when she fell on wet stones. He said no prayers aloud, no sermons, just presence. And in the morning, the carpenter called him son. The next week, a boy approached him in the market, silent at first. Then, placing a broken idol in Kifle's hands, he asked, "Can your God hear better than this one?" Kifle held the shattered figure gently, then nodded, "Yes." Because he has ears that bled for you. The boy's eyes widened. He said nothing more, but he came back the next night. Not far away, the Queen of Meroe received a scroll. No name, no sender, only a single line. The word is growing, in silence, in soil, in hearts. What about you? Have you ever been to a place where trust was lost, where words had failed, where hearts were hard? Did you still try, or did you walk away? Kifla didn't, and maybe that's why the fire found him. If you're still here, thank you for walking this far. How are you feeling after this part of the story? Drop a comment if something stirred inside you. And may the one who lit the fire walk with you into unknown cities. He had not heard that voice in years, not like before, not in the way it once thundered in silence. Philip walked alone through the morning haze of a foreign city. The roads were unfamiliar. The tongue was strange. Even the air tasted different, drier, hungrier. But the voice had come again, not loud, not urgent, just one word: go. He had been in Caesarea, teaching, praying, watching his daughters prophesy, living in the slow joy of harvest. Then the stirring, the breath of the Spirit that no walls could hold back. And now here, a city with too many idols, too much noise, too much forgetting. And yet, something was waiting, or someone. He passed a market where dyes bled into sand. Women bargained for salt. A blind man sang beside a pillar. Philip sat beside a well worn from the road. He remembered another road, a chariot, a man with skin like fire and questions like rivers. Had the seed grown? Had it survived? He never knew. He had vanished as commanded. Caught up, moved on, carried by the will that moves beyond maps. But today the memory returned, and with it a whisper, the word, does not forget. A boy approached him holding fig. "You're not from here," the boy said. Philip nodded. "And yet I've come." The boy smiled. They said someone would. Philip looked up. "Who said?" The boy pointed to a stall across the square. An old woman sat there, wrinkled, still watching. She held a wooden box, carved from olive wood. Philip froze. He crossed the square slowly. Each step felt like walking into a memory. The woman did not speak until he stood before her. Then she opened the box. Inside, a scroll, worn, used, loved, and written in a hand he recognized. Not his, but familiar. She whispered, "He said you would come one day. The one who baptized the first flame." Philip swallowed hard. The past had returned, not as memory, but as a path. The stranger had returned, but the city was no longer soil, it was ready for fire. And beyond the alleys and altars, the story he left behind had grown into something he never imagined. The scroll was not ancient, but it had passed through fire. Not the kind that blackens parchment, the kind that burns into hearts. Philip held it gently, as though it still breathed. "He wrote these," he asked the woman. She nodded. "With tears and prayers and silence." He turned the scroll slowly. Each line was familiar, yet reborn. Verses of Isaiah, fragments from the Gospels, and notes, personal trembling marked in the margins, shared with the carpenter's girl, retold after the storm, remembered from the fig tree. Philip closed his eyes. The word had grown. The woman offered him tea. She spoke in fragments, of a young man with burning eyes, of late-night gatherings, of broken idols left on her doorstep. "They called him Kifla," she said. "He called you the first fire." Philip said nothing. He simply wept. By sundown, they led him through alleys narrow as memory, through a hidden doorway, into a room lit only by oil and reverence. They were waiting. 3 elders, 2 children, a blind girl with a voice like wind. They did not ask who he was. They simply offered him a seat and listened. He did not preach. He told a story of Samaria, of miracles, of a spirit stronger than sorcery, and then of a desert. A man in royal robes, a scroll, a question. What is stopping me from being baptized? He had never told it like this before, but here in this dark room it felt like a harvest. Each word sank deep. Each breath felt holy. A young man stepped forward after the story. Tall, thin, eyes wide with longing. He held out a folded cloth. Inside a smaller scroll. I was one of his last students, the man said. We thought the fire would fade after he left, but it hasn't. Philip took the scroll. Inside were names. Dozens. Men. Women. Children. Each marked with one phrase. Baptized in his name. And then a warning. The young man's voice dropped. The priests have begun to notice. A new ruler comes next season, one less tolerant. We think persecution is near. Philip felt a coldness rise. He had seen it before. In Jerusalem, in Samaria, now here. But then the blind girl whispered, "Darkness cannot burn. Only light can." And somehow her words steadied him. That night, as they prayed, he heard the voice again. Not thunder, not fire, just the whisper. You are not returning, you are continuing. When the past walks forward and the present listens, the story becomes a river flowing where it must, no matter the terrain. They came during the fourth prayer. Heavy boots, bronze helmets, torches like angry stars. The room froze. The old woman clutched her chest. The children huddled behind a jar. The blind girl began to hum softly a psalm no one taught her. Philip stood, not in defiance, in surrender, to whatever God still desired. The captain stepped inside. He looked at the crowd, poor, unarmed, unimportant. Then at Philip. "Are you their leader?" he asked. Philip shook his head. "No. The word is." The captain blinked. A soldier behind him snorted. The tension thickened like storm clouds. Then the young man with the scroll stepped forward. Then the old woman. Then the blind girl. Then the baker. Then the carpenter's grandson. They all stood. No one spoke. Just stood. Together. The captain seemed unsure. This was not a rebellion. This was not sedition. This was light. Quiet. Unmoving. Unbreakable. He said nothing. He turned, and they left. The silence afterward was unbearable. Then, the blind girl laughed. Not wildly, not mockingly. Just purely, as if something had cracked in the heavens. Philip knelt. His voice cracked with tears. "Lord, they still stand." They sang then, low, broken, beautiful, a hymn of fire. Later that night, the old woman approached Philip. "He never came back," she said softly. "Kaifle." We waited. We thought Philip took her hand. "He came back in all of you." The word had not returned void. It had returned multiplied. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Click like to mark your journey through the fire. Subscribe to keep walking these sacred paths with us. Comment. What part of this story clung to your soul tonight, and share this with someone who needs to know that the word still returns. May God bless your courage. May He guard your nights, and may your fire never dim. He no longer walked as fast. The legs that once chased chariots now shuffled through quiet gardens. The back that once bore the weight of royal ledgers now bent in prayer. The Ethiopian eunuch was old, but not forgotten. He lived in the hills beyond the capital, a small home, stone walls, a fig tree planted by his own hand. No title, no guards, no wealth. But when he walked to the market, mothers nodded with reverence. Children stopped playing to listen. Even merchants gave him extra without charge. They called him Abba, not father by blood, but by spirit. He rarely spoke of the palace. He never spoke of the queen. But sometimes when the wind turned soft, he would sit under the fig tree and whisper a name. Philip, not in longing, in gratitude. The scroll was still there, wrapped in cloth, kept in a carved box. Letters faded from time and tears. Sometimes he opened it, not to read, just to hold it, like a promise still breathing. He bore no crown, but he carried scars, from exile, from betrayal, from watching others fall away. Some left the gatherings when the first threats came. Some denied ever knowing the way, but the word remained. One morning, as the sun stretched over the hills, he heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. A traveler stood at his gate, dusty, worn, eyes familiar. The eunuch rose. They did not speak at first. Then the man bowed. I bring news of a fire you once lit. They sat beneath the fig tree. The man told of a city by the sea, of a blind girl who sang, of a carpenter who now preached, and of Philip. He came. He stood. He left. The eunuch's hands trembled. Was he well? The man nodded. He wept. He remembered. He gave. The eunuch closed his eyes. A tear slid down his cheek. He whispered. Then the fire did not forget its flame. The traveler handed him a small scroll, new but written in a hand he once trained. He read the name at the top, Kifla, and his soul smiled. Sometimes the seeds we plant bloom long after our hands have withered, but bloom they will, in places we may never walk. The traveler spoke gently, as one carrying ashes from a sacred fire. He told of Kifla's final days, not with grief, but with reverence. He had been arrested near the market in Adulis, charged with disrupting temple customs, accused of gathering people under foreign gods. He did not fight, he did not flee. When asked to recant, he said only, "I speak of a man who forgave me before I knew I was guilty." They gave him a chance to save himself. He chose to sing instead, a psalm, low, unshaken. On the day of his death, the square was full, not to mock, to witness. They had heard the stories. They had felt the warmth of his life, and now they saw the cost. He was not afraid, not proud, just faithful. The traveler paused. The eunuch sat very still. His hands clenched the arms of his chair, but his eyes held no rage, only tears. He died young, the eunuch whispered. Yes, but not in vain. The traveler shook his head. No, in flame. They sat long in silence. Then the eunuch asked, "Did he doubt in the end?" The traveler smiled, only once. He asked me, "Do you think he will remember me?" And before I could answer, the child beside him said, "How could he forget his voice?" That night the eunuch wrote, slowly, painfully, but with clarity. He wrote not to kings, not to scribes, but to them, the ones still gathering in rooms of shadow. To those who walk in light, others cannot see. I am an old man now. I have no titles, but I carry something older than blood and deeper than memory. I carry the name of the one who met me when I was searching but did not yet know what I lacked. I carry the touch of water and the vanishing of a man who changed me forever. I carry the voices of those I taught and of one who taught the world after I faded. Do not fear flame. It does not destroy the faithful. It reveals them. He sealed the letter with olive oil, gave it to the traveler, and watched it disappear into the night. A small boy had listened from the fig tree's shade. He climbed into the eunuch's lap. "Who was Kifla?" he asked. The eunuch smiled. "A tree, planted long ago, that never stopped giving fruit." The word had not returned void. It had returned with scars and seeds. The season slowed. The fig tree thickened in shadow. Its roots deepened, and so did he. The eunuch no longer walked far, but each morning he touched the soil, watered the roots, greeted the sun with a whisper, Still I remain. He spent his days telling stories, not from scrolls, from memory, of a man who disappeared in water, of words that burned through silence, of a carpenter's boy who asked about idols, of a girl who sang with no sight. He told them slowly, as if each word was a seed, and the children gathered, not for lessons, but for something more ancient, like rain. One night he did not speak. He sat long beneath the fig tree. The stars blinked, the wind softened, and then he slept. In his dream he stood again on the desert road, but the sand did not burn. The sky shimmered, and in the distance a chariot, empty, then water, still, clear. He stepped in, and on the other side, a man waited, no longer vanishing, only smiling. Philip. The next morning, the boy who asked about Kifle found him under the fig tree, peaceful, still, gone, but not lost. The people came, not in robes, not in weeping, but with bread, with stories. They sat under the tree and read the scrolls aloud. They remembered, and remembered rightly. A girl, now grown, lifted the small boy onto her lap. He asked, "What did he leave us?" She answered, "A root. That became a tree. That still bears fruit." And so the fire lived on, not in crowns, in children, in scrolls, in the soil of the faithful. If you walked this far with us, let your heart pause here. May the God who called him from a chariot now call us all from silence. The throne room was not as grand as it once was. The pillars still stood, the gold still gleamed, but the silence felt heavier than marble. Queen Amanitari sat alone, not in fear, in thought. She had ruled for 6 years, wiser than her age, stern yet just. But beneath the crown, she remembered, a fig tree, a gentle voice, and a story told in whispers of fire water and a vanished man. She had been only 10 when the old eunuch died, too young to understand faith, too old to forget kindness. He had given her figs and riddles, and once a wooden box, carved with vines, worn smooth by prayer. She had hidden it. Now she opened it. Inside the scroll, faint but intact, and atop it a letter, unopened, sealed in wax, marked with a single word. "For the one who rules after me." Her hands trembled. She read, "If you sit upon the throne, may you know it was once held by a servant. I ruled not with gold, but with silence, not with decree, but with fire. If power calls you to forget, the lowly remember who once held this box. And if faith ever feels like folly, remember who vanished from water. I do not ask you to believe, only to wonder. The rest he will do." She closed her eyes. He had never demanded anything of her, never preached, only lived. And now, even in death, he had written truth softer than silk. She whispered to herself, was he right? Outside, the chants of priests echoed in the courtyard. Ceremonies to forgotten gods, fire without light. But inside, something stirred. A memory, a voice, a question. What is stopping me? And beyond the marble halls in the shadows of tradition, the fire began to stir again. This time not from below, but from the throne itself. She did not burn the letter. She placed it beneath her pillow, as if truth could seep into her while she slept. Days passed. Ceremonies continued. Priests chanted, animals bled. But the queen no longer heard them as before. The incense felt stale, the words hollow. Something deeper had stirred. She summoned no council, issued no decree. Instead she walked, alone, through markets, past bakeries, to the edge of the city where the fig trees grew. There she found the old, wrinkled, bent, but still bearing fruit. One sat under the shade stringing beads. The queen approached quietly. "You knew him?" The old woman nodded. "The eunuch. Another nod. Then a whisper. He made water speak. They spoke in fragments. Of nights under stars. Of scrolls passed in silence. Of children healed by laughter, not spells. One man brought out a box. Inside a scrap of parchment. Faded letters. One name, Jesus. He had kept it hidden for 40 years. Not out of shame, but to remember. She returned to the palace heavy with memory. She lit no candles that night, spoke no prayers, but held the box to her chest and wept. The next day a commotion shook the courtyard. A child 8 barefoot was dragged by a priest. He held something tight in his fist. The queen stepped down from the throne. "What is this?" The priest spat. He was caught with heresy. She knelt before the boy, opened his hand. Inside, a crumpled scroll. Just one line. "Blessed are the pure in heart." The priest hissed. "This must be punished." The queen looked at the boy. Tears. Fear. But not shame. She stood, turned to the court. "If this is a crime," she said softly, "then may I be guilty first." Gasps. Silence. Then a single voice. She remembers. That night she did not sleep. She wrote in her journal. He said to wonder. "I wonder now, and I feel warm." Some thrones command obedience. Others carry questions. But the holiest begin to tremble when truth walks in. She summoned them at night. Not with trumpets, with whispers. Not in the palace. In the garden beneath the fig trees. 10 came, then 30, then more. Old, frail, forgotten by the priests, but not by the word. They gathered under moonlight, expecting questions. But the queen knelt. She brought a bowl. Water. Cool. Clear. She removed her crown, and one by one she washed their feet. No decree. No speech. Just water and silence. When she reached the last man, he wept. Why, he asked. She looked up. Because the highest must remember what it means to be lowest. That night she dreamed. She walked through a city with no walls, no temples, no altars. Just people. Thousands. Their faces shone like fire. But she could not see their eyes. Then she saw 3 figures. Philip holding a torch. Kaiflo carrying a scroll. The eunuch planting seeds into soil made of light. They did not speak, but their silence thundered. She woke in tears. At dawn she issued no royal order. She whispered to the scribes, "Open the sealed room." They hesitated. Inside were forbidden texts, banned under former queens, among them the Gospels. Faint, fragile, still burning. She placed her seal on them. "Make copies, let them read, let them wonder." And so it began. Not revival, not revolt, just light, creeping through the cracks of old stone, like morning. If this story moved something in you, tell us. Like if you felt the Queen's fire. Subscribe to journey with us as the word travels deeper. Comment. What crown are you willing to lay down? May your throne be truth, and your truth fire. They were not bound in gold, not guarded by soldiers, not declared holy by decree. Just ink, just parchment, just breath turned into syllables. But the Queen had said, "Let them walk." And they did, folded under shawls, hidden in baskets of grain, sewn into hems of beggars' cloaks. The Gospels became pilgrims. The first left the palace at dawn, carried by a widow with salt-white hair. She walked without sandals, but her steps were sure. No one noticed her, which made her holy. She stopped in a village where fear had long choked the air. There she found a teacher, tired, uncertain. She said nothing, just handed him the scroll. He read one line, "Do not fear, little flock," and his hands trembled. The second scroll crossed the river on the back of a fisherman. He couldn't read, but he could carry. He left it at a shrine once used for curses. The next day it was gone. Weeks later, a woman wrote back to the queen. "We found your letter. It read us." The third was nearly lost. An orphan boy had tucked it into his tunic. He was stopped at a checkpoint. A soldier found the scroll, unrolled it, raised a torch, paused, then read, "Blessed are the merciful, he did not burn it." He handed it back. "Run," he said, "and tell no one you saw me." Some scrolls reached safe hands. Some were destroyed, but not all. One crossed the desert on a camel's back. Another was carved into memory by a mute girl who recited it word for word before her death. Still another found its way to a scholar once devoted to idols who now taught children by quoting, "The last shall be first." They were not missionaries. They were not preachers. They were male, divine male, wrapped in sweat and sand, delivered by tears, opened by trembling. The queen received letters in return. Scraps, drawings, words written by shaking hands. "We remember now, he is not forgotten. Tell the fig tree we are still here." One letter came with a stone, engraved. They burned the scroll, but the word stayed. She kept it on her desk, next to the box, next to the crown. When words walk, they do not return empty. They return as flame, and flame speaks in every tongue. He ruled with a spear. His word meant exile or death. He bowed to no priest, trusted no scroll. But one night a letter arrived. It came tied to the leg of a wounded mule. No escort, no seal, only a scrap of parchment stained by sweat and time. He would have thrown it in the fire, but his daughter, fragile, breath shallow, saw the name. Her lips moved once, Jesus, then silence. He kept the scroll, not out of faith, out of memory. 3 nights later, he unrolled it and read, slowly, alone, each word a splinter. He did not raise his voice. He bore our wounds. He ate with sinners. He stopped, because something was listening inside him. He began to memorize it, not by choice, because it would not leave him. The next full moon he gathered his men, not in war, in silence, and he told them a story, not from power, from ache. He told them of a man who never ruled but changed rulers, a man who never fought but disarmed hatred, a man who died but would not stay dead. They didn't speak. Then one voice, "Where is he now?" The chieftain paused, then whispered, "Everywhere silence burns." They left with no verdict, but they came again the next moon, and the next. Eventually, one man brought his son, another brought figs. One brought a crippled friend, hoping for a touch. They found no miracles, only memory. But memory is a seed, and the soil had been broken. The chieftain carved the scroll's words onto his spear shaft, not to threaten, to remember. When a merchant asked why, he said, "Because some names pierce deeper than war. When the word walks into tents of iron and hearts of stone, it does not beg, it burns." And even warlords begin to wonder. The sea was not kind, but the letter crossed it. Wrapped in oilskin, hidden beneath crates of salt and dried fish, smuggled not like gold, but like breath. It arrived on a forgotten island. No temples, no scrolls, just scattered huts and the memory of exile. She lived alone, once chained for her faith, now free but watching waves instead of crowds. Her name was Hadassah. She had not spoken the name aloud in years, until now. She opened the scroll, and something inside her cracked. He sees the lonely. He walks on water. He remembers the forgotten. She read aloud to the waves, the seagulls, the wind, and they listened. By night, she lit a lantern, copied the scroll by hand, finger by finger. By dawn, there were 5 copies. She gave one to a fisherman, one to a dying woman, One to a girl who never spoke, one to a boy who drew shapes in sand, and one she placed beneath a rock near the cliff. For the sea, they read them, aloud, haltingly, and something began to shift. Not their circumstances, their silence. It began to hum. The girl spoke for the first time. He walked on water. The woman, now near death, whispered, "Then maybe he can walk to me." The fisherman carved a cross into his oar, not for safety, for memory. One boy read the scroll and wept. No reason, no understanding, just tears. He clutched the parchment to his chest and whispered, "I don't know why, but I want him to come back." Hadassah wrote a letter to no one. The word has walked here. It left no footprints, only echoes. Sometimes the word sails, sometimes it climbs, sometimes it simply waits to be opened, but it never stops walking. If this story touched you, let it walk further. Click, like if the waves whispered something tonight. Subscribe to stay with us in this long journey of light. Comment. What part of the scroll would you copy? And may the God who walks on water walk toward your soul tonight. The path was hidden by thorns. Only those who knew its ache could find it. He did not wear a robe, did not carry a scroll openly. Just a pack, a scar, and a copy worn thin of the words once whispered across waters. His name was Bereket, grandson of a fisherman, son of silence, disciple of letters that walked. He had heard the stories, all his life, of Philip, of Kifla, of the eunuch who vanished into water. But stories were not enough. He wanted presence. The cave lay beyond the ridge, forgotten by men, remembered by fire. Its mouth yawned like the grave, but inside, stillness and faint traces of ash. He stepped in, knelt, lit no flame. Instead, he opened the scroll. Blessed are those who hunger. He came to his own, and his own knew him not. The light shines in darkness, the echoes did not return, but the silence received. He found a stone near the back wall, marked, carved with trembling hands, long dead. One word, abide. He traced it with his finger and wept. In a corner he found scraps, charred, faded. One held only 2 letters, pa, another the faint curve of a hand-drawn fig. He gathered them gently, like relics. He did not come to preach. He came to remember. That night he lit a small lamp, held the scroll close, and whispered, "You walked through chariots, you crossed deserts, you climbed thrones. Now walk with me." Outside the wind howled, but within the cave held its breath. Sometimes the flame waits, not to burn, but to be asked, and one whisper can awaken 1,000 embers. He did not plan to stay, but the cave would not let him leave. Bereket laid out the parchment. Stone by stone he anchored the corners and began to copy. By oil light, by memory, by ache. Each word came slow, not from ink, from blood. He knelt and washed their feet. He touched the leper. He wept. He paused. The silence answered, not with sound, with presence. On the 3rd night, voices approached, rough, tired, a group of wanderers, women, children, a man missing one leg. They had fled raiders, carried no food, only fear. They saw the lamp, asked to rest. He nodded, made space. They settled in corners, drank silence, until one noticed the parchment. A child crept close. "What is that?" Bereket looked up. "A flame." The old woman leaned near, eyes clouded by time. "Flame does not sit still," she said. "It dances." He smiled. "Then listen and let it dance." He read, softly, the Beatitudes, the story of a woman who touched a robe, the words of a crucified king whispering forgiveness. The children forgot sleep. The old forgot pain. Even the limping man leaned closer. No one moved, not even the fire. The scroll came alive, not as doctrine, as breath. Between each word, the wind sighed. Between each silence, a memory stirred. A girl cried when he said, he called her by name. A boy asked, did he die? Bereket nodded. Yes. And no. The old woman whispered, I've heard these words before, long ago. But they left. Bereket touched her hand. No mother. They waited. By dawn, no one slept. They simply stayed, still, like embers. Sometimes the flame waits not to be preached, but to be heard again, by those who thought it was lost. They did not leave. The cave became home, not of stone, of presence. Bereket used the back wall as a desk, the flat stone as an altar, his own lap as a cradle for parchment. He copied, they listened. He read, they wept. He prayed, they joined. The cave held echoes now, not of bats, of song. A boy carved a cross into the wall. A girl collected smooth stones and drew fish upon them. Even the man with one leg began teaching the children how to kneel. One morning, the old woman whispered, we have no priest. Bereket smiled. We have no temple either. She pointed to him, but we have a teacher. He froze. No one had ever said that. No one had dared, but the word wrapped around him like a mantle of fire. That day he did not read. He taught, line by line. He fed 5,000. He forgave the one who cursed him. He rose. He let them speak the words after him. Their voices cracked, but the fire did not. They sang that night, not with melody, with memory. Their voices bounced off stone, climbed the cracks, danced among the dust. A girl asked, will he come here? Bereket looked toward the cave's mouth. Morning light spilled in. It lit the scroll, lit their faces, lit his tears. He said he never left. And the fire, after all those years, smiled. If you felt the warmth of the cave, let it keep burning. Like this video to keep the embers alive. Subscribe so the scrolls may keep walking. Comment. What word burned brightest for you tonight? May your cave become the sanctuary, and your silence a hymn. She dreamed of water, not a flood, not a storm. A still pool, clear, lit from below. In the dream, people stood by its edge. Some young, some bent with time, some carried scrolls, others carried silence. One by one, they stepped in, and did not rise the same. Amsal awoke breathless. She was the youngest in the cave, quick with questions, quiet with secrets. She found Bereket preparing parchment, eyes still full of the dream. She asked, have you ever seen water change someone? He looked up slowly. His hand paused mid-line, and softly he said, once, in a chariot's shadow, on a desert road. He told her the story, of a man who read in search of meaning, of a stranger who ran beside him, of a question whispered with trembling lips, what is stopping me? The cave grew still as he spoke. Others gathered. They knew the story, but never as if it were their own. When he finished, the girl asked, can it happen again? Another voice from the shadows. Here Bereket stood, walked to the cave's edge, pointed east. There's a stream, he said, cold, shallow, but faithful. They rose, together. The stream curved like a ribbon through the rocks, barely a whisper, but gleaming. Light danced across its surface, like something remembered it. One by one they stepped to the edge, not with ceremony, with breath. They looked at Bereket. He looked at them. This is not tradition, he said. This is a return. Amsale stepped first. Water met ankle, then knee, then heart. She did not speak, just turned to Bereket, and he whispered, you are seen, you are loved. You are his. And he lowered her and raised her. She wept and smiled, and the water waited for the next. That night they sat by the stream, feet bare, hearts full. They sang nothing, just listened to water remembering. Has water ever spoken to you like that? Leave a thought or a memory. We're listening. One by one they came, some with songs, some with silence, all with longing. Bereket stood in the stream, hand steady, heart undone. He did not rush. Each name he spoke like a prayer. You are not forgotten. You are made new. You are loved. A child barely 6 stepped forward. Bereket knelt. Their eyes met, and the child whispered, I want to belong to someone. Bereket smiled through tears. You already do. He lowered the child. The water received. And when he rose, the wind shifted as if heaven had leaned closer. A woman came next, shoulders heavy with past. She did not speak, but when she rose, she gasped, as if air had returned for the first time. An old man followed, blind, held by 2 others. He asked only, Is the water still there? Bereket placed his hand in it, guided the man, lowered him, and when he rose, he said, I saw light. Then came the elder woman, too frail to step in. Bereket approached, knelt, voked water in both hands, gently poured it over her crown. It ran down her face like grace. She whispered, I have waited for this since my mother still had breath. No one clapped. No one cheered. They just watched. And the light within the cave seemed to pulse brighter with each name spoken. That night they gathered again, wet clothes drying on rocks, laughter beneath fig leaves, silence between beats of the heart. A child asked, Will we remember this? Amsaleh answered, We will not just remember it, we will become it. Bereket added, This is not the end of the story. It is how the next scroll begins. If you were standing by the stream, whose name would you whisper? Let us hear it below. The water listened still. They did not stay. The water had spoken, and now they would walk. Each carried something, a scroll, a name, a whisper that would not leave. Bereket stayed behind, but the others, Amsaleh, the elder, the limping man, they stepped out of the cave, out of shadow, into flame. They did not preach. They remembered, and in remembering they kindled. One returned to her village and told the story in bread-shaping loaves with marks from the scroll. Another sang lullabies rewritten with lines from the Gospels. A child painted water on walls, and people came just to sit near it. One man, quiet and alone, returned to the place where the chariot vanished. He knelt, unwrapped a scroll, placed it on the ground, and whispered, We are still here. Amsaleh wrote letters, not in long form, just fragments, to strangers, folded in leaves, tucked into baskets, left in marketplaces. Each began the same. We carry water now. Some read and wept. Others read and followed. The stream near the cave still ran, slow, steady, bright. And each morning Bereket came to it, sat, listened. Sometimes he saw no one, but the water moved as if stirred by unseen feet. Inside the cave the scrolls remained, wrapped, guarded, alive. The flame never needed much, not a crowd, just a whisper, a name, a soul ready to be warm again. And so the word did not end. It walked, again, through water, through wounds, through wonder. If you've come this far, you did not just watch a story. You walked one. From deserts to thrones, from fig trees to forgotten caves, from water to fire, you traveled where silence still speaks. And for that, thank you. Thank you for sitting with Philip, for running beside chariots, for weeping at fig trees, and for listening to scrolls that never stopped whispering. This isn't just history, it's memory, alive. And now a little of it lives in you. May you carry light like Bereket. May you wonder like Amsala. And may your name, yes yours, be written where only grace can reach. If this journey stirred your soul, don't walk it alone. Subscribe to this channel, not for more videos, but for more wonder, more breath, more fire. Leave us a word, a name, a moment that stayed with you. Because here we don't just share stories, we pass the flame. And until the next scroll opens, may peace guard your nights, may hope soften your steps, and may the God who sees the eunuch on the road now see you exactly where you are.